Hello everyone, my name is Kit, and I am here today to go over the Caster Chronicles July Week 2026 meta-analysis. For those who don't know, Caster Chronicles is a TCG that was created by the Force of Will Company about a decade ago, and it didn't last very long. I think it was 2 years in English, and I think 5 years total in Japan. And then the game just died. However, the company Speedrobo Games, a independent company that makes a few independent TCGs, decided to pick up the license and re-release it with new, reworked cards and a new product system. And I've been really into the game with this reboot. I did play the original just a little bit. Unfortunately, at the time, Buddy Fight was a big thing, and I was really into Buddy Fight. But I am here back with the reboot, and this game is just fun. So the official Discord server had a league tournament. Basically, it was 4-round Swiss. You were matched up against an opponent, and then you had 2 days to play your games. And it was best of 3 set 1 constructed play. So set 1 means all of the starter decks, and then, of course, all of the set 1 cards. Because of how the packs are constructed, that's roughly 5 cards per color, faction, whatever you want to call them, to support the colors. And then you basically get foils on top of that because of how the packs work. Basically, you would get 5 cards of one color and then 2 cards that are foil. That could be anything from a select pool. So this tournament was just set 1, and it had 13 players, and we played all of these over Tabletop Simulator. And first place was Sea Mustard with Ignis Void, second place was Pier with Terra Ignis, and third place was Meme with Luna Aqua. And here are the stats of all the decks, though the splashes mess with these stats a bit. Basically, this was created by Speedrobo himself, and he included some stats that some of us disagree with. For example, there was a Aqua deck that had 1 Luna card in it, and so it got counted as Aqua Luna instead of Mono Aqua. The Luna card was a caster that you basically could just play it in any deck you wanted for the effect, and didn't really do anything for color identity or anything. I will get over some of the splash cards in a bit. So, I'm going to go over some notable cards that were in the tournament. We've got Migo for Void, and Migo is right here. This card is a bit of a menace. It is a 2-cost card. For those who don't know the game, Caster Chronicles is very similar to Duel Masters or Magic the Gathering, in that you have your mana and then you have shields instead of life. You have 7 shields, but mostly the same game. So this is a 2-cost Void card where it is a servant, so that's a creature, and it has 1000 attack, and it has an on-enter ability where you look at your opponent's hand, choose a non-caster card from among them, remove it from play, and then your opponent draws a card. Now, if it didn't have the clause of non-caster, this card would be way worse, because casters are your mana, or rather, they're your colored mana, and that would cause a whole bunch of bricks. But the card is already notorious for causing a little bit of problems with bricking, and then on top of that, before this tournament, there were cards that have since been errated that could loop it very easily. You can still kind of loop it, but you have to kind of build your entire deck around it now. But before, people were just looping this thing like crazy. It was awful. The second card I wanted to note was Tactless Butterfly. Now, both Migo and Tactless Butterfly are very notorious. They are probably the best cards in the game as of set 1. And Tactless Butterfly is basically your opponent can't attack it, and it can always attack the player, regardless of their defense setup, which makes it a very powerful tempo boost to basically any deck that runs Terra as a main color. Next we have Bamamon, Source of Greed. This card is a really big card that gives you 2 orbs, which are the shields for this game. It was considered one of the best cards before the erratas, and while it itself was really only errata to get its attribute changed to what it should have been, it seems that the meta has moved in such a way where Babylon, while still a really, really good card, the deck is built into was not as good as expected. And that's partially because of Diablos the Deceiver, an Ignis card, which is very similar to Babylon, but instead of giving you 2 orbs, what it does is it adds your mana cards back to your hand, your caster cards. At the end of each of your turns, you have to return a caster from your field to your hand. But what that effectively means is any card you place face down to create like a generic caster would just be re-added to your hand, and that would refill your hand in the late game, so you could just finish off your opponent, which was very powerful in aggro decks. It was effectively, if the game went long enough, you're not out of fuel yet. Next is Lumiel. Lumiel was one of the Splash Casters, very, very popular card. I think the card should be in every single deck until further notice. What it does is your opponent's attack and defense stats are swapped, which can matter a lot because this game has like Yu-Gi-Oh! Attack and defense position, and you have to pass the defense position in order to attack the player, and sometimes you just want to kill something in attack because it's, killing you. So, lots of very powerful tricks that happen with that. You can also use it at instant speed, so you can use it as a battle trick. A very, very powerful card, and it doesn't cost anything to do except for tapping itself, so it is effectively a 1-cost unlimited spell to do that. Clara Sheree, I actually have to go look this card up. So Clara Sheree was a ace caster where you could tap it and discard a caster from your hand to change the position of a card. And this effect, while not as generic as Lumiel, in my opinion, is still quite effective at shifting tempo or getting rid of problem cards in a pinch. And you can still use it in any deck you want. You just have to kind of have casters ready to go. Hilda Willow was another really, really generic card. This card is Jason the Mind Sculptor. For any of you Magic players, this card on tap allowed you to look at the top of your opponent's deck and either leave it on the top or put it at the bottom of the deck. Very, very powerful to just have. I use this card myself. I think it is one of the best splash casters. And finally, I have a little bit of a combo here. It's more 2 cards than 1 card, and that is Mental Recovery and Partner Change, which is Aqua and Ace, respectively. Mental Recovery allowed you to return all the cards that you would own back to your side of the field. So what Partner Change would do is you would swap one of your casters with one of your opponents, then you would play Mental Recovery and steal your caster back without giving your opponent their caster back. So you could effectively ramp while de-ramping your opponent. Very powerful combo, but it didn't quite go as hard as it could have, partially because the counter to this combo is Mental Recovery. So a lot of people had Mental Recovery in their sideboard prepared for this combo. It was a known factor going into this event. So let's go into some of the play trends that happened. Players prepared for a set of decks and strats much slower than the winning decks due to previous events and testing, which resulted in aggro slipping in more wins than expected. Very, very powerful aggro decks Ignis created, and I wasn't expecting them either. It's actually how I lost one of my two games that I lost. And people don't quite know how to sideboard in this game yet, so they were generally experimental. This might have added to Ignis's aggro power. And that being said, some mid-range didn't do poorly against aggro. So I'm expecting a lot of refinement in the mid-range decks to try and counter the aggro, while still being able to reliably counter the more control and combo decks. Which leads on to, I suspect that combo will become a bit more refined into more mid-range and control decks, where it just happens to have a combo, rather than decks solely built around a really powerful combo and doing that as well as possible. And of course, the mental recovery combo is still potentially powerful, even if it is even more now a known factor. So people will be playing mental recovery in their sides if they can. And finally, I think a few of the splash casters are going to start converging on a few. I said Wimiel earlier. I also said Hilda Willow earlier. Both of those are probably now going to be in every single deck at least. And then there's a few other splash casters here and there that will either end up in sideboards or end up in the main deck as one-ofs as well. So here was my deck. I went 2-2 with this deck. And I think I did pretty well, though I do feel my game against the aggro player was not as good as it could have been. And I also feel this deck needs a few refinements. So let's go over it. Now, I can't actually read these cards, so I'm not going to be able to say all the names perfectly well. But this caster would allow me to destroy my insects or my flowers to kill things at the same cost, which didn't actually come up all that much. And I don't know if that was because I kept it at 1, or if it was just not a scenario I really needed a lot of the time. There was a few times where during games I was really considering using it, but the tempo of how the games played out resulted in it never quite being the best thing to do. I still think that card is good. I might add a second copy to the side just to work out better matchups for the card compared to other matchups. We have Ferocious Mantis here. This card is a staple of Terra decks. It is on break, which means when it's broken from the orbs or the shields, you can instantly play it. And then when it's played, you can destroy one of your opponent's cards with 3 cost or less. And it is a 4 cost in itself with 2000 attack. The 2000 attack is about the middle range of attack. Anything higher than 2000 is considered pretty strong, and anything lower than 2000 is considered weak. So this card is just generically useful, very good for getting tempo back, and the break effect can just come out of nowhere and shift the game. Gawain here is, you could rest it to save one of your orbs being attacked. I was mostly just using this to add a few extra Void Casters. It is probably the second best Void Caster behind Merlin. I have 2 copies of Griffon here. This was a double corrupt, so double breaker. If you know Duel Masters, it basically breaks two shields at once. And on enter, destroy any rested, so that means attacked or used up servant. Probably the best high end for Terra. Very generically useful. You could pretty much fit it in every single Terra deck. But you don't want too many because it is a 6 cost. It is late game. So 2 of it was pretty understandable. Grudge attack at 3. This card allows you to destroy any rested servant as a single use spell. And it costs 3. And yeah, it's just really good removal. Next, I have 2 Hasters. It is a 5 cost Void. This was one of the cards that was errated. It originally was on play, you get its effect, but now it's on last words, which means it's on death. They also flip the stats a little bit. And what it does now is, on death, your opponent sacrifices or banishes, it banished in this game, your opponent sacrifices equal to the amount of face-down casters they have. So that's the cards. That could be any card in their hand to put face down, Or you can use a card like Nightmare, which is the 3-cost spell over here, to flip your opponent's caster's face down. That's how you get that effect off. Really, really powerful shielding effect, because your opponent basically has to break through it and trigger its effect. But that also means your opponent times when it goes off, so they can find the optimal point to get rid of it. Then there's my Hilda-Willow and Plumer Splashcasters. I've got one more Splashcaster here in Passion Wing Sire version. These two cards were very useful in every single game they appeared in. Again, I think these two should be in every deck. However, Sire was a lot more niche, and I don't think that card is going to stay in the main board. I'm probably going to move it to the side. Then we have Merlin. Merlin is you get to peek at one of your opponent's orbs, and you draw a card on enter. This is basically the easiest Void caster to just throw in if you're not focusing on Void, but still want like a good amount of Void casters in your deck. And the orb peek was really powerful, just being able to make sure that the card I'm breaking is not a break, and if it is a break, controlling when that goes off is really good, even though you only get it once, basically, throughout the whole game, because the thing about this game is you can only have one face-up caster of the same name. Then I had 4 copies of Migo, and basically the point of this deck was to abuse Migo and Tactless Butterfly. This is a deck I call Butterfly Tempo, and the idea was to use Migo to get rid of the answers to Tactless Butterfly. Tactless Butterfly can only be answered by, admittedly, nearly every single removal card in the game, but your opponent has to have a removal card, because, well, Tactless Butterfly can't be attacked while it is rested, and it rests when it attacks. And it also has Hubris, which means it can always attack the orbs. So the idea was to get a Tactless Butterfly or 2 out, and just keep swinging at the opponent, while they can't do anything about the butterfly, because Migo's getting rid of all their answers. Tactless Butterfly is basically a deck-building challenge in the game right now, and Migo just makes it even more annoying. Migo here is draw a card if one of your insects died this turn. Really good effect. Basically is just here as a Terra caster. It's one of the good ones. You run it. Nightmare I've already been over. Nalathep is very similar to Ferocious Mantis. It also targets 3 or less, but it removes them from the game instead. It also has Break, but its stats are worse. It is 1000 instead of 2000 0. So same amount of base stat total, but by not having it stacked on one stat, it makes it significantly weaker, even if it is more flexible. We already went over Sire, but basically its effect is your opponent's... If your opponent has 6 or more orbs, your opponent starts with 7, their break effects don't resolve. So most matchups, this just means your opponent's first orb cannot trigger break, because you break the orb, it gets added to their hand, they then get to choose if they want to use the break or not. Your opponent has 6 orbs from there, and that's the only time it really goes off, because after that, it's less than 6 orbs. But there are decks that add extra orbs, and against them, this card is really good, hence why I'm probably going to move it to the sideboard. Princess Papillon is Recursion. You discard a caster and tap it to get back an insect. Tactless Butterfly is an insect, so you can get back your Tactless Butterflies. You can also get back your Ferocious Mantis, so you need that for the removal. Very good card. This thing basically extended a lot of my games in a pinch. Now I forget the name of this card, but this card, you can tap and discard a caster after one of your insects attacks an orb to kill one of your opponent's reversed or defense position cards. This basically currently only combos with Tactless Butterfly. This card is going to get better in the future, but even now, with Tactless Butterfly, this basically extends your ability to attack your opponent's orbs, because they might only have one defender. You go in with your Butterfly, you tap this, you kill the defender, and then you can swing in with your other cards. Then we have Rose of Insolence, I think that's its name. And this was just my primary 2-drop. It was 2 cost, drop it down, It only has defense. It does count as a flower. Unfortunately, I'm not running any of the cards that really care about that, other than this card. Something Superior, I think. And this card is a solid 2-drop. It basically just stalls your opponent for a little bit. And same for Sneering Orchid. It is a break, but it has 3,000 defense. 3,000 defense is very, very strong in this game. Your opponent basically has to be reaching endgame to beat over it or use their removal. Which more removal spent on these is less removal spent on dealing with the Tackless Butterfly. Finally, this card, I do forget its name, but it is a 3-cost counter spell for servants, but instead of sending the card to the bin, it adds it back to hand. So your opponent's still paying the cost, they're still trying to get it onto the field, but it just bounces to their hand and they don't get any on-enter effects. And you have to do it on the cost. This was a bit of an experimental card that I think is going to move to the side. My idea is, if I'm playing a tempo deck, a counterspell seems like a really good idea to keep that tempo. But that 3 cost, and it's just 1 cost too high. It is just 1 cost too high to be relevant in so many situations. Finally, we're going to move on to my sideboard. And Arthur here was basically just to be another Void caster name if I needed it. Say my opponent's like dealing with my Void in a lot of way, or I found out that my deck needed just a bit more Void caster, I could deal with it that way. But I never added this to my deck, so this is probably getting removed from the sideboard. Lucifer is the signature boss of Terra. It is basically a Tackless Butterfly with double corrupt for 7 cost and a much bigger stat line. But Lucifer is a little bit tricky to use, so I put it in the sideboard. And yeah, I think it's staying in the sideboard. It is a good card in the matchups you want to see it in, but against anything aggro, you just do not want it in your deck. Because this card is just too late for it to really matter. Especially when you can recur your butterflies. It is just generally a better card, butterfly, from just being less than half the cost. This card, I, unfortunately, again, forget the name of, but this card could put any card from your opponent's graveyard onto the bottom of the deck. You can do that at quick speed. It was basically a counter to any graveyard recursion shenanigans. Is probably going to end up in every single deck as every single sideboard, just because that effect is just relevant enough to end up in sideboards, but nowhere near relevant enough to end up in main decks. And I do think it's run at 1. This is very much my opinion on this card. It is a skippable card as well. It's just so easy to fit in to a sideboard that it's probably going to end up in a lot of sideboards. And Graveyard Recursion is just relevant enough to be annoying. I forget this card's name, but it is 5 cost, and on play, your opponent must banish one of their stuff. So your opponent gets to choose what they get rid of, but it does get rid of something. And this card, I want to move to main. The stats, it is 5 cost, but its stats are relevant. The effect is just barely relevant enough to matter. It's just a generally useful card. I ended up putting it in a lot of my games into the main deck from the side. I just wasn't really sure what quite I was doing with this deck, and this card was not quite making the cut into the main deck as I was building it, and so I just threw it into the side to see what happens. Finally, Proclamation of Life and Death. Your opponent chooses a card to destroy. This card I basically didn't put in because I didn't think it was quite relevant enough for removal. And I think it's one of these cards that I think should be in the main board but can be sided out. Because it's not quite relevant in all matchups. You do not care about removal where your opponent gets to pick what it is. But it is 2 cost. It's really cheap. And sometimes your opponent just has 1 card on the field, or maybe 2 when you want to get rid of one of them, but don't necessarily need to get rid of both of them. It's a weird card for exactly this deck. In most Terra builds, you are running it though. So that was my deck, and I went 2-2. Again, it lost to aggro and another deck that I will get into later because I happen to have it as a notable deck. So let's move on to the decks that actually won. First place was Sea Mustard with Ignis Void. Ignis Void is terrifying. All the Ignis cards are really cheap aggro focus cards. You can get a lot of really powerful attacks on the orbs. Like you can give them double corrupt and stuff. And of course, you've also got access to Sire in your own color. Both versions of Sire, since you want to use the level 2 as well. And being able to combo all that with the Void engine of Migo. I'm surprised this deck isn't running 4 copies of Migo, I'll be honest. But Cthulhu also allows you to just stop your opponent's resources. I'm also surprised that this was one of the Ignis decks that wasn't using Diablos. So it was very, very aggressive in that case. It was like we're using Cthulhu to just, like, flip the card. This is a very efficient build. You basically just want one Void caster, one Ignis caster, set everything else face down, except for your Sires, of course, because you need the level 2 at some point, and you're just hitting face. I could see why this deck stole the tournament. I unfortunately didn't match up against it, so I don't know too much about the details, but the sideboard, Nightmare, to cancel out important casters, extra copies of 2 copies of Nalithep in case your opponent is managing to actually hit you, and you need some more breaks. Mental recovery to just deal with the opponent, which of course you need Aquacasters, so why not use Hilda Willow, the best splash Aquacaster? And then some extra Void. And Azathoth, if the game was going long enough for Azathoth to matter, that's basically an Exodia effect if your opponent has 0 orbs. Very, very aggressive deck. I think this is the deck to kind of test against to see if you can actually deal with aggro. And this is the deck I did fight. Again, no Diablos, I'm realizing. But this deck was so annoying. Basically, Bombastic Lily to be a really annoying early defense. Disembodied Soul, really cheap early game. Lots of win costs. All the best Terror cards. All the best Ignis cards as well. This deck just snuck under all my strats and just hit. Really, really good card. Really, really good deck for fighting exactly me who was not prepared for it. Do I have really anything else to say about this deck? It's very sensitive. If it doesn't kill your opponent quickly, it can just run out of gas. And it's a lot of individual casters, so you might not get the effect you want, but you're going to have a lot of effects, is the idea. And then we have third place, which is Luna Aqua. This deck is the deck I lost to in my final game, I think. So this was basically the deck that was the difference between me making it into top 3 or not. And this deck is just add a bunch of orbs back. Most of them have break effects. You can search out all your spells to create even more draw orbs, and you can also search out all your servants using this card so you can answer whatever your opponent is doing. Fairly annoying deck to actually deal with, but I got very close in this matchup because this deck is basically hoping it can heal out of your opponent's tempo. Meaning if you can rush it, it loses. And if you can manage to keep your own defenses up, it can also lose that way. But the amount of control this deck has can suck up so much tempo. the bunny, the goddamn bunny, was answering all of my defenses, and they only run it at 1, but they could keep getting it back. So I want to go into some of the special mention decks that I thought were rather interesting. I think I've got 2 of these lined up, and this is what the community affectionately calls NTR. This is the Mental Recovery Partner Swap combo deck. And I won against this deck in the first round. This deck has issues. I think the Mental Recovery Partner Swap combo is really powerful, but I don't think you want to build your entire deck around it. Aqua has a lot of tools for being able to search out the combo. I think you really want to use it about once or twice in the game total to just annoy your opponent, and then you want your rest of your deck kind of focusing on something else. Actually playing like more of the mid-range game, and just use the combo to get a bit more of an advantage. But this was more of a proof of concept deck, it seems, just to find out what exactly the deck is trying to do. And I think it was very interesting for that. It was a challenge to try and answer it, but I did 2-0 this deck because I managed to just get around all of its little tricks. And in this deck I also beat, but oh my god, I was terrified the entire way. This is Silver Ignis. I like to call it Nightmare, because what you do is you use World of Anger, which basically means your opponent has to go into attack, and they have to attack if able. They cannot switch to defense. So basically, both players are dealing with full aggro. No one can play defensively. But then on top of that, you have this barrier that I unfortunately forget the name of. But basically adds Slow Start, which is Summoning Sickness, to all of your opponent's cards. So your opponent has to play cards in attack, they cannot defend, and they can't attack on the first turn you play them. Basically stalling your opponent out for that creature out for the whole turn, and allowing you to do whatever you want to answer it. Very interesting deck. I just think it needs a bit more refinement to actually be good. But I was terrified the entire time I was playing this. This is a fun deck. I like this deck a lot. I kind of want to try it myself. And so let's go into the conclusions and what potential predictions I have for future tournaments. And this is all just set 1 thoughts. I have not tested set 2 whatsoever. It is in open playtesting. You can find the cards. You can read what their effects are. You can test them. You can give feedback to the designers on the set 2 cards. I just haven't done that yet. So this is all thoughts on set 1. So aggro will likely be refined and be the deck to fight next week. I think Diablo is going to actually end up in a few more decks than the fact that it was missing out of the top 2. I do think it's going to be at 1 or 2 in those decks. Just because, again, it is your end game fuel recovery. But otherwise, the decks are mostly going to be as the top 2 decks were. Lumio and Hilda Willow are to be staples. I think those things should be in every single deck, main decked, 100%. Just, I do not care what your colors are. Those 2 effects are so generic and so easy, and running them at 1 doesn't mess with your color identity whatsoever. With this game's really generous mulligan rule. Just run it. Just run it in just run these 2 in every single deck, I think. And I think other Splashcasters are going to become more common as well. I think from here on, we're just going to see a lot more Splashcasters, because turns out running a few casters that are off color just for their effects is really good, especially in Aqua when you can just search them out. Sideboards now have a frame of reference to work from, so people can start actually building them better. I think it's still going to be a little bit before people work out how to build sideboards and how to use them, but having a frame of reference for what decks are currently in the meta is a better idea than what we had before, which was mostly just independent testing and a few for fun tournaments where people weren't really trying. This was the first tournament with, like, prizes on the line. Migo is still very strong post the errata, but I don't think it's dominating. So Migo itself wasn't errated, but cards around it were, and I think it is still a very, very strong card. I just no longer think it's the best card in the game anymore. I think it's probably the second or third. Very, very strong card, but it is not the dominant, like, attention-drawing card it was. I also think combo builds may refocus to be mid-range in a majority with a special combo. I've mentioned that before in the video. I just think the combo builds are not quite there, because the combo consistency is not there, and the power is not so game-warping that it wins the game by themselves. So I think they're going to be a bit more mid-range or control. And Stall itself, or like control, is falling off. This was a very popular deck during people's testing. But I think it's still a strong deck, but I think it's going to fall off in the meta a little bit. Just as it kind of has this tournament already. Because people are obviously finding the aggro decks that can actually deal with Stall. And I think finding hidden information efficiently is powerful. But A, players don't really have the skills to use effectively. This is a bit of a self-call out. As I've mentioned here, it is a memory test to find information and keep track of it. I do believe this game allows you to take notes in the rulebook, or at least was like allowed by Speedrobo or something. But you basically have to practice the skill of using the information effectively. And then additionally, you don't really want to be looking for information just for the sake of information. You want to be doing something else with it. You want Migo to do the hand rip. You want Merlin to be looking at the orb and drawing you a card. You don't really want a card that just says, hey, let me look at your hand, and nothing else. Splash cards and deck-changing sideboards are targets for future experiments. So I think a lot more people are going to work out how to splash cards, maybe even splashing like little elements here and there. And I did say deck-changing sideboards, so that's like using the sideboard to basically change one of the main colors in your deck to a completely different color. I think people are going to start experimenting a bit more with that. That's been some discussion on the Discord. I don't know what that will look like, but I do think Aqua is going to be the main color for those sort of decks, because Aqua has all the searching in it. And as I said, I do not know how Set 2 is going to affect this. I've only looked at the Terra cards in Set 2. And yeah, that was all from me. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm probably going to do a few more of these. I'm definitely going to do more Caster Chronicles videos. I have, of course, my unboxing of my Kickstarter stuff. I'm definitely going to record that. And this video was a little late. I had to work out how I was going to record everything and find the time for that. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this little analysis of the July League, and I will see you all next time. Get out.